They never needed to chain your body, only your imagination. From the moment you could walk, the path was already paved. Sidewalks, schedules, slogans. Work hard. Play by the rules. Success takes time. You weren't taught to ask who designed this map. You were taught to fear what happens if you step off it. And so you walked. Not because you believed, but because everyone else was walking too. You saw them in traffic, in offices, in waiting rooms, eyes fixed on clocks, souls locked in inboxes, all marching toward a finish line someone else drew. Retirement, freedom, the promised land, the golden glow at the edge of every paycheck, the place where the suffering would finally make sense. But Alan Watts saw it differently. He saw a system that promises liberation through obedience, a dream that smells like incense but tastes like ash, a life where you trade your youth for a future that never arrives because it was never real. They told you, be patient, that your freedom would come at 65, that if you sacrificed your mornings, your passions, your presence, one day you could live. But what they didn't tell you is that the dream has no door. Only a hallway with mirrors, reflecting your younger self getting further and further away. And the cruelest part? By the time you realize the exit was never real, you've already lost the part of you that knew how to leave. They sold you a script. Study, work, retire, relax. A plot written by strangers with profit margins. You didn't write it. You just inherited the costume, the business casual armor, the briefcase of borrowed dreams. And it worked. Oh, how beautifully it worked. You learned to clock in your soul and clock out your hunger. You learned to measure your worth by output. You learned to nod when the manager smiled, to smile when the exhaustion burned. You learned to swallow yourself, day after day, until the taste of truth felt foreign. But Watts wasn't interested in your productivity. He was interested in your being. He said that real freedom isn't earned, it's remembered. It's not something at the end of the road. It's the silence underneath the noise, the question that rattles inside your skull when the lights are off and the TV is still on. Is this it? You've asked that, haven't you? In meetings, in traffic, in the shower before another Monday you never asked for. Is this it? You keep waiting for life to start, but life is not an appointment. It does not begin at 65. It has already begun, and most of us missed it while waiting. This is the tragedy Watts wept for. Not that men are oppressed by force, but by illusion. The illusion that meaning must be deferred, that joy must be scheduled. That peace is something you buy after 4 decades of losing yourself. But here's what they don't want you to know. The system doesn't want you to be free. It wants you to feel almost free. It wants you obedient, but hopeful, productive, but tired, compliant, but dreaming. Because the moment you stop dreaming of retirement, you start waking up. And waking up is dangerous. A man who wakes up doesn't work just to survive. He questions why he was trained to starve in the first place. He doesn't retire, he revolts. Not with fists, but with presence. With refusal. With the unbearable audacity to live now. But the world is built to make that terrifying. Because if you stop walking the path, you'll see the others still marching. You'll hear their voices. You're being irresponsible. Grow up. Don't throw it all away. But what they're really saying is, don't leave the dream, because then I might have to admit it's a nightmare. So the question is no longer, when will you be free? The question is, why did you believe you weren't already? And the answer begins here. We grow up believing that work is noble, that to sacrifice your time, your joy, your very presence for decades is honorable. But Alan Watts knew otherwise. He saw what most never dare to admit, that this so-called honor is engineered servitude, the holy camouflage of modern slavery. Because if they told you the truth, that the machine needs your energy, not your fulfillment, would you still show up every morning with a smile? Would you still call it ambition, this slow spiritual death you've been trained to celebrate? The system was never designed to awaken you. It was built to sedate you with hope. Hope that tomorrow will be better, that the promotion will fix it, that if you grind hard enough, you'll someday earn permission to rest. But Watts dismantled this myth with surgical calm. The meaning of life is just to be alive. It is so plain and so obvious and so simple. Yet everyone rushes around in a great panic, as if it were necessary to achieve something beyond themselves. What if that panic is the plan? What if the lie of future freedom is the most elegant prison ever built? You weren't born to be free. You were born into a curriculum, a moral assembly line. A system of bells, bells, and bells to wake you, teach you, feed you, send you, remind you, warn you, and finally, bury you. And the brilliance of it is this: it never uses force. It doesn't need to. It uses shame. Because what happens when a man says, "I want to leave the race"? He is not congratulated. He is condemned, labeled lazy, irresponsible, a coward, not because his choice is wrong, but because it threatens the others who are still pretending the race has a finish line. And so they build new gates inside their heads. Deadlines, bills, titles, marathons of imagined necessity. But what saw that underneath all of this urgency is a question too terrifying to ask. What if I've been wasting my life playing a game I never chose? That question is a spiritual earthquake. It shakes the false floor beneath every calendar and contract. And it reveals a deeper force, not capitalism, not politics, but something more ancient, the fear of presence. Because if you stop chasing, if you stop striving, then you are left only with yourself. No titles, no to-do lists, no performance, just you. And for most people, that is unbearable. So they fill the silence with noise. Work becomes their opiate, productivity their drug. They build their worth on their exhaustion, as if being burned out proves they are alive. But what's new better? He saw that our addiction to purpose is really an addiction to distraction, from the unbearable truth that we do not know who we are when we are not being useful. This is the wound. You don't just fear unemployment. You fear unimportance. You don't just fear rest. You fear stillness. Because stillness reveals what movement hides, that you are not a cog in a wheel, but a soul in a trance. And the trance has names: retirement, stability, security, beautiful names, hollow meanings. You work 40 years to earn what you had at birth, permission to breathe. But by then, your lungs are tired. Your spark is gone. And your identity is a title that no longer applies. You were an engineer, a banker, a manager. Now, you're retired. Which means what? This is where most men die, not in their bodies, but in their meaning. What saw this fate? He warned that when we live for roles instead of reality, we become shadows, ghosts of our own lives. He said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. Because how can you know who you are if everything you've believed was built by those who profit from your confusion? They trained you to chase symbols, money, status, respect, but never told you the cost: your attention, your authenticity, your now. And here's the truth they cannot monetize: you were already free. You just forgot. You traded presents for plans, traded wonder for routines, traded life for someday. But someday is a sedative. And the only antidote is now. The panic doesn't start with a scream. It starts with silence. The kind that hits when you close your laptop at 10:43 p.m. and realize you've been working all day for something you can't even name. When you step outside on a Saturday and don't know what to do with yourself unless someone tells you it's productive. When you ask yourself what you would be without the job, the calendar, the badge on the door, and no answer comes. That's the beginning, not of enlightenment, of collapse. Because when the structure starts to crack, it doesn't collapse with clarity. It resists. You tell yourself you're just tired. You tell yourself it's a phase. You tell yourself other people are worse off. But the truth keeps spreading beneath the surface like a quiet infection. You've spent most of your life preparing for a moment that may never come. You don't know what you're working toward anymore, only that if you stop, everything might fall apart. But that's the illusion. You were told that your value increases with your efficiency, that the more you do, the more you are. But Alan Watts dismantled that equation. He didn't say do less to sound spiritual. He said it because most of what we call doing is a response to fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of emptiness. Fear that without external proof, you might not exist at all. So what happens when that fear is exposed? Most retreat. They double down on the system. They work harder. They upgrade their routines. They optimize their sleep. But Watts wasn't talking about optimization. He was talking about presence, something the system deliberately replaces with momentum. And this is where the psychological trap becomes visible. If your entire sense of identity is built on the premise that usefulness equals worth, then any pause feels like death. That's why retirement isn't peace, it's paralysis. Because when the machine no longer needs you, you realize you never learned how to need yourself. You've been given roles: worker, provider, achiever, but not identity, not being, just a script. What's called it the myth of the self, the idea that you are what you do, what you earn, what you own. That myth serves the machine, not the man. But here's where the turning point begins. Watts didn't offer solutions. He exposed mechanisms. He said that before you can wake up, you have to stop pretending you're asleep. And most men are experts at pretending. They know something feels wrong, but they keep calling it stress. They know the ladder leads nowhere, but they keep climbing. Because standing still would force them to look inward, and most would rather burn out than do that. That's the crisis. Not a breakdown, a realization that you've invested decades into a system that was never invested in you. So what do? Watts would say, stop asking what you should do. That's still the system talking. That's still the language of output. The real shift starts when you see through the illusion entirely, when you understand that there is no scoreboard, no prize, no audience, that nobody is keeping track. And in that terrifying emptiness is the first real freedom you've ever been offered. The freedom to stop performing, to stop being the product of expectations you never agreed to. But most won't take it. Because freedom, real freedom, has no applause. It won't congratulate you. It won't reward you. It won't even feel good at first. Because it strips away everything that gave you identity and offers nothing in return except clarity. And clarity is brutal. It tells you that no one is coming to validate your choices, that there is no right path, no final chapter where it all makes sense. Just now, and what you do with it. So if you're feeling lost, that's the first honest reaction you've had in years. If you feel like everything is unraveling, maybe that's the system finally losing its grip. And if you don't know who you are without the noise, then you're finally close to the truth. The moment the lie collapses, what's left is not clarity. It's debris. A man stands in the wreckage of a belief system he once called life. No more roadmap. No more applause. Just the dull realization that the system was designed for production, not for consciousness. Not for him. Alan Watts didn't hand out blueprints for how to rebuild. He exposed the blueprint itself as a trap. That's where most people misunderstand him. They look for steps, strategies, next moves. But what Watts offered was a change in perception, not a plan. The first tool in that shift is this: stop taking yourself so seriously. Not as an excuse to avoid responsibility, but to dissolve the false identity that was built on it. The worker, the achiever, the reliable one. The man who makes it happen. That persona is a costume. Watts saw it for what it was: a psychological performance scripted by a culture obsessed with outcomes. You weren't born serious. You were trained to be. You were trained to measure your value by what you do, what you own, and how others perceive it. But value doesn't come from measurement. It comes from presence, something that can't be bought, sold, or stacked into a resume. And here's the second mechanism. Every time you delay joy for later, you train your mind to believe that life is somewhere else. You teach yourself that the only time worth living is after the work is done. But work is never done. That's the system's design. Watts compared it to music. No one listens to a symphony just to get to the final note. The point is the play, the moment. But your culture has turned life into a process, something to optimize, monetize, and finally escape from when you're too old to enjoy it. You've been made into a unit of progress. You're allowed to exist only if you're building something. But Watts asked a different question. What are you without your function? Most men don't want to find out. Because they've never experienced existence without pressure, without debt, without targets. The idea of simply being, not lazy, not passive, just present, feels wrong to them. That discomfort is the conditioning at work. But that discomfort is also the doorway. It's not enough to reject the system. That's easy. Watts was pointing to something harder, withdrawing your psychological investment in the lie that your worth is conditional. This doesn't mean quitting your job. It means no longer believing your job defines who you are. It means no longer hoping that one more promotion will fix the quiet dissatisfaction you've carried for years. That's not a motivational speech. It's an extraction process. You're removing the parasite of false purpose, The implanted belief that meaning is found in compliance and status and finishing the script. Because there is no finish. That was the trap. The system never ends, it just updates. New deadlines, new roles, new problems. And if your meaning is tied to those problems, you'll never be free. You'll just be useful. What's introduced a different form of power, the kind that doesn't need to be measured to exist. It's not productivity. It's perspective. Seeing clearly without needing to fix what you see. That's a hard thing for modern men. They've been trained to fix, to act, to improve, but not to see. Not to witness their own life without turning it into a task. Presence, for them, feels like an action. But it's not. It's a refusal to participate in the theater of urgency. And that refusal is not passive. It's surgical. You're cutting away every false necessity, every invented crisis, every obligation rooted in fear of what might happen if you just sat still. That stillness is where clarity starts. Because the real tragedy isn't just living in the system. It's never realizing you could opt out, not by leaving society, but by leaving its mental architecture. Watts wasn't trying to dismantle capitalism. He was dismantling the idea that you were your career, that you need to become something before you can exist, that you are not allowed to enjoy life until you've earned it. That was the lie. And once it's exposed, the reconstruction begins not with ambition, but with silence. Not with planning, but with awareness. You don't need to invent a new identity. You need to stop clinging to the one that was built for you. That's not escape. That's return. To what? To the part of you that existed before the curriculum started. Before they told you what success means. Before you started measuring your days and deadlines and your worth and output. That man is still there. You've just been too busy chasing the future to notice. The script didn't fail. It worked exactly as intended. It produced you, not as a man, but as a mechanism. Someone who knows how to meet expectations, follow schedules, submit reports, apologize for needing rest. You were built to function, not to question. You were shaped to perform, not to understand. Now you're seeing it. Maybe not with certainty, but with suspicion. A suspicion that your exhaustion isn't a bug, it's the price of compliance. That your confusion about what matters isn't a personal failure, it's the residue of a lifetime lived in someone else's logic. You don't need to burn the system down. You don't need to leave your life behind. That's not what this is. This is about ownership, psychological, not physical. Ownership of the fact that most of what you call yourself is inherited values, desires, fears, ambitions, all structured to keep you oriented toward a distant reward that never comes. Watts didn't say this to provoke rebellion. He said it to provoke recognition, that the reward is never real, that the only thing you've ever had is now, and everything that told you otherwise was a hallucination dressed as purpose. But here's the twist. Even once you see this, the world doesn't change. Your job doesn't disappear. The bills don't stop. The machine keeps running. You still have to show up, respond, play the role. But something in you is different. Because now, when someone tells you to keep pushing, you'll hear the hidden demand behind it. Stay asleep. When someone says retirement will be worth it, you'll hear the scriptwriters whisper, keep waiting. When you catch yourself sacrificing the present for a future you can't even describe, you'll know exactly what it costs. And that knowledge changes the game. It doesn't make life easier. It doesn't make you happier. It makes you responsible, not to the system, but to your awareness. You can still wear the mask. You can still play the part. But you'll never confuse the costume for who you are again. What's called this waking up? Not in the spiritual sense, in the cognitive sense. The realization that freedom isn't granted, it's claimed. Not by escaping life, but by refusing to live it on borrowed terms. That's the new problem. Not how to succeed, but how to stay awake in a world designed to put you back to sleep. And there is no final peace in that. No moment of triumph. Just you, navigating a culture of noise with a kind of quiet clarity. The clarity of someone who knows the rules are arbitrary. That the scoreboard is fake. That the real test is whether you keep chasing what you already had before the chase began. That knowledge won't get you applause. It won't get you approval. But it will get you one thing the system can't offer: reality. And reality doesn't comfort. It confronts. Now, I want to ask you something not as a viewer, but as someone who's lived long enough inside the script to feel its pressure. The system gave you an image of success. School, work, structure, security. But what would your life look like if you never saw that image? What would you want if you were never told what to chase? Leave a comment answering this. If the idea of success had never been defined for you, what would you have created instead? Don't describe the life you wish you had. Describe the life you would have written before the world taught you who to be. I'll be reading.